good morning, everybody, here and online. I just have to say thank you. It's always an honor to be up here because Reverend Jane rocks. And to be able to have her invite you to speak to her community is really an honor. And I want everyone to know, she learned via text this morning. We had someone else who was supposed to do the meditation. And she just did that on the fly for us, which I think is totally amazing. And I'm not going to embarrass anybody by calling them out, but another of my celebrations is I have some old friends here today that I've not seen in a long time, some of whom have supported my environmental and economic system change work from the very moment I arrived in Central Oregon, really, and some of whom have been very important elders on my spiritual path, and it is so cool to see you here today. So, who do you give your power to? Who are you seeking, or what are you seeking approval from? Who are you competitive with? I was recently asked to write an essay for an upcoming Unity Worldwide booklet for Lent, and I was assigned the topic of competitiveness, which really resonates with me, which I'll share. But it's also what inspired me for this talk. Most of us are raised in a culture of competitiveness. We're taught that whole survival of the fittest story. We're inundated with marketing that pushes us to compare ourselves to others, hopefully unfavorably, so that we'll buy whatever thing they're selling that'll make us look or feel better or smarter or whatever. It's kind of the culture that we swim through. We're also handed a whole bunch of programming from very early on, when we come into this human form, about the rules of approval. I have said before that we're all born perfect and that our parents get a hold of us. And they do the best they can, but they're dealing with their own programming. And I want to tell you a story of how profoundly this has impacted my life. So many of you here know that I had a total knee replacement 8 months ago. The whole reason that came about was because when I was 21 years, some 30-some-odd years ago, I offered to help a friend of mine start her horse to ride. I had started many, many horses. Usually I took it slow. I had rarely been thrown off on the first ride, but this time, this was a horse, little paint horse, that was very, very fearful and very, very resistant and had already been returned by a couple of trainers. And I didn't want to do this. I was scared, and I was hurrying him. That wasn't fair either. I was cowboying him. And I was really scared, but I was listening to my gatekeeper, which was my dad, whose approval, we had just had another row. My dad and I had always had a rocky relationship. We had just had another row. And I was unaware at that point of how much I was still putting him in charge, how much I was still trying to gain that approval. And I was hearing what he approved of me for. Cylvia's tough as any boy. She's fearless. She'll take on risk, etc. I did. I got on. I got off real quick. Broken, really broken, and multiple surgeries. It changed my life. It was a very severe injury. Very blessed to say I worked hard, I've been an athlete, able to work it through, but I wouldn't have had a knee replacement at 54 if it weren't for that early programming. I ask you just to consider, and it can be subtle, I'm going to come back to that. Just consider, how does competitiveness and comparison play out in your life right now? The dictionary definition of competitiveness is possessing a strong desire to be more successful than others. That is at its core a scarcity-based concept, right? It is telling us that it's reflecting a belief that we're not good enough unless we're being better, whatever that may be, than someone else. It's also telling us, that dictionary definition is telling us, it's reinforcing the message that we can't all be amazing shining lights, all radiating and reflecting one another all the time. The culture we live in doesn't buy into that. A friend of mine recently shared this little I was surprised it came from this guy, but wisdom comes from all over the place. And he said, basically, his philosophy is there are 3 things that cause all the problems, all the conflict, all the lack of peace in our life. That is regret about the past, worry about the future, and comparing ourselves to anyone else. Regret about the past, worry about the future, comparing ourselves to anyone else. Yeah, that's pretty simple and pretty profound. Theodore Roosevelt wrote that comparison is the thief of joy. And I would offer that it's also a death knell to our creativity. Because when we are comparing ourselves, often feeling less than someone else, we're judging our value on what we think we're supposed to be, which keeps us out of the place of fully expressing and appreciating what we are and our own amazing, unique talents, expressions. And you know something? Y'all are better than that. You are just better than that. You're more than that. Unity is a prosperity-based way of thinking. It is a way of thinking, kind of to William's point. We believe that everyone is a spark of light. Everyone has glory to add. One person shining doesn't dim our own expression, but that takes mind training to really, really grok onto. I want to read. So for those of you who are newer to Unity, the primary founders of the Unity Worldwide Movement were a couple who really got their power going, got their ministry going in the late 1800s, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. And they were proficient writers. And I want to read you just a couple short excerpts from a couple of their books. We're going to get our Myrtle on. I actually really love Myrtle. Charles gets a little bit more of the light, but a little bit more of the accolades, but Myrtle rocks. So this is from her book. It's a classic, Healing Letters. It's just a paragraph. Remember and be encouraged, dear, that when we began to awaken and feel the urge to minister, and she's talking about when Unity was first getting started, and they had no idea how they were going to get it started. When we began to awaken and feel the urge to minister, there was no such thing as a Unity Center, not even friends who saw things as we did. We did come in touch with a few and were together in a class, but we all had to branch out and start using what we got in our own way, meeting whatever need presented itself. It was the thing that shone in our face and the results we got through prayers that drew others to us. And we hadn't time to think much about the success that we were having. There was so much to be done for the family, and our own eager study of whatever words of truth we could find or hear kept us busy. We were not thinking of the approval of others or how they regarded us, and were not depending on gathering or other folks' comparisons and cooperation. We were perfectly free to do whatever work Spirit brought. And I want to read one more. This is from another of Myrtle's classics, How to Let God Help You, however you define God. Let's see, 146. I asked William, our host, when he came up, I said, please don't move the books. I've got them open and in order. So get busy by using the truth you know. Love those about you in a practical way. Pay no attention to what others are doing insofar as to make comparisons. Bring forth your own joyous world of love, friendship, beauty, and plenty. God is giving everything required to build such a world. There is within you the God-given intelligence to build such a world. Get at it. That's her. Get at it. That was kind of Myrtle's feisty attitude. And as I was preparing for this talk, A Course in Miracles is one of my main spiritual bases. And I was working with it one morning, and in a beautiful synchronicity, which is happening more and more and more as I start to prepare to deliver to you all, I came across this in A Course in Miracles, and I changed the language to be gender neutral because that's just my gig with the Course. I don't believe God's a he, personally. Because God's equal children, that would be all of y'all, have everything they cannot compete. But if they perceive any of their brothers or sisters as anything other than their perfect equals, the idea of competition has entered their minds. Do not underestimate the need to be vigilant against this idea, because all your conflicts come from it. Competition. Do not underestimate the need to be vigilant against that idea, because all your conflicts come from it. By the way, just a little tangential side note, because there seems to be a lot of interest, we are going to be restarting a Course in Miracles study group here in the next few weeks or so. We'll let you all know. So, in other words, when we are in a competing against mindset, we are underselling ourselves. We're believing that we are not enough, that we are not actually truly what we are. Who are you competing with? Or what are we competing with? Because in addition to the people we may be trying to gain approval from, impress, outcompete, whatever, it's also embedded in the cultural soup that we swim in. The marketing, the so-called norms, the messages, the stories. I think it's really important to remember a whole lot of that crap is airbrushed. We are often, from the magazine covers to the stories, I mean, we're often not even comparing ourselves to any reality. We are moving through a culture that increasingly, in many ways, ignores truth. And that is dominated by egoic, human-only thinking. And that is what we are going to want to impress? That is a holy, holy, unworthy, and unholy gatekeeper. It's not adequate. I'll tell you another little story. Wasn't sure I was going to share this one, but I will. Over the last couple of months, I was presented with an opportunity to make a proposal to a client, to an organization. It's a global economic system change organization that I am really impressed with. I wanted this position more than anything professionally in the last 6 or 7 years. I really, really wanted it. And I thought I was going to get it. I was such a perfect fit. And I made it down to the last 2 candidates, and they chose the other person. And they chose the other person primarily because they wanted to enter, this is mostly a Europe, South America-based organization, and when they made their entrance into the US, they wanted to come in with more obvious racial diversity and racial diversity experience. Now, I totally support that because my environmental and economic system change movement needs to be diversified. It needs to be more inclusive. But crap, it hurt. It hurt. And it knocked me for the first time. It put me into a place of self-doubt where I was like, wow, I am a mid-50 woman and I'm white. And have I missed the window in my movement that I've committed 35 years to? Have I missed that window now? And that showed me, and I wallowed for about 20 hours. I thought I was going to wallow longer. I'll get to that in a second. It rattled me, and I realized that my self-doubt and my deep disappointment reflected the fact that I had put that one client, that one organization in a gatekeeper position. And when they didn't open their gate to me the way I wanted, I was feeling less than. That's a classic indicator, right? Well, the next morning, I kind of expected to get up and just hit the remote control, but by golly, I felt inspired, and I made it out to my deck, and I pulled on the mind training, which is what Unity is. It is what Course in Miracles is. It is what New Thought is. Now, if you had told me that 20 years ago, that I was going to go do some mind training, it would have freaked me out. But what I have realized, kind of to William's point, I love the synchronicities. We're always in mind training, all the time. Every waking moment, perhaps beyond. We're in mind training when we're consciously employing principles. We're in mind training when we're subconsciously letting other crap bombard us. For good or for ill, we are always in mind training. What I was able to do with the tools that I've learned through our movement, through this life-altering body of work, the principles, I was able to go, come on, Syl. You know who you are, right? Come on, I know the value that I've added. I know what I have to add. I know how that organization actually responded to me. I got myself back and realized I'm gonna send that gatekeeper off on a train and know that something better is coming around. Choo choo, right? I want to read you something tied to this now from Charles Fillmore, husband of Myrtle. Page 107. This is kind of interesting, and you have to kind of remember when these were written, right? It's quite over 100 years ago. There's a great similarity in the homes of nearly all people who have about the same sized income. Each one unconsciously follows suggestion and furnishes his home with the same sort of things as his neighbors. Here and there are exceptions. Someone is expressing his or her individuality, overcoming mass suggestion, and buying the kind of furniture he really wants, or that is really comfortable and useful. This free, independent spirit has much in its favor in making a prosperity demonstration. The delusion that is necessary to be just like other people, or to have as much as other people have, causes a spirit of anxiety that hinders the exercise of faith in demonstration. A wordy way of saying, stop comparing. Stop bringing yourself down. And then I want to share with you one of my very favorite MLK quotes. I think many of us come to Unity and New Thought, I've shared this before, because we're a little bit of a misfit. We might not feel like completely, right? Yeah, me too. We might not feel completely at home in what mainstream culture tells us we're supposed to be. Listen to this Martin Luther King quote. But I must honestly say there are some things in our nation and the world to which I am proud to be maladjusted, and wish all men of goodwill would be maladjusted until the good society is realized. Right? If you feel maladjusted to what we're seeing out there, stand up and say hallelujah. Right? I mean, who really wants to fit in to what we're seeing before us? That's the story here. Yeah, thank you, Miss Benjamin. It's like the island of empowered misfits. And this competition and comparison thing can be super subtle. So spouses, partners, if you've lived with someone for a long time, you have a way of doing things, and the other has a different way of doing things. And how often does it feel great when your way of doing things works a little better? Right? You ever have that? I just had that on the river with my beloved on our river trip. Did you ever have that little stab of glee, maybe, when you hear about a celebrity you don't like having a, quote, fall from grace? That's a warning flag. When you hear of another person's challenges in their life or with their family or their health, and you kind of take that attitude of tisk, 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 because you feel like yours is going better and you've made some better choices. I think anytime we're tisk, tisking, we are in comparison. It's a red flag. I recently had an insight. This is probably going to lead into another talk at some point, but related to tisk, tisking. It dawned on me that another form of offering a fellow being grace is to change how we think about them. To come back to the truth that they too are empowered spiritual beings with all kinds of capacity, even if it's not being demonstrated at that moment. That's a form of offering grace. One more story that talks about how subtle this is. I mentioned I was going to agility camp. Well, My little agility dog is like 14 months old, and she's not quite old enough to compete into next month. But a few months ago, so I got Olive, that's her name. I got her from an organization called Heard You Needed a Home. It mostly rescues and rehomes herding dogs. And Olive is a little reject she's a border collie, and she's a reject from some Eastern Oregon ranch. She wasn't very good at herding. And it was her and her identical little sister from the same litter. And a couple months ago, and I've been working with a certain trainer and a certain way of doing agility, and her little sister Onyx has been going down a different path, and we hadn't seen each other. And this is I'm still progressing on this competitiveness thing. They offered a fun run, a play trial, where you can just go and practice and stuff. And I knew her sister was going to be there. And it's so ridiculous. And I found myself thinking, oh God, I hope Olive does better. I hope she has a better run than her sister. And I even shared with John, my partner, how ridiculous I knew that was. And yet, at the end of the day, I was thrilled that Olive had the better run. They say often you teach what you need to learn. This is why I'm talking about this today, for sure. I also feel, and maybe this is still a remnant of ego, you guys can let me know, but I also feel, at least for me, at my current level of growth, subject to change as I do, there's a difference between competitiveness and striving for self-improvement. I think it's important, and there's a paradox that comes with this. I think we can be non-competitive and still be striving to gain spiritual maturity, to gain more peace and power in this life, to develop our spiritual poise. Striving to become peaceful, powerful, spiritual beings doesn't mean, this is the paradox, it doesn't mean there's anything at all wrong with us right where we are. That's part of the mind training I think that Unity helps with. We can feel whole, we can feel the truth that we are whole and perfect and awesome right where we are, and still know that we can be even better and even more. And sitting in that paradox, you are already, each one of you, perfectly empowered spiritual beings, right exactly where you are. I would absolutely encourage you not to compete against anyone else. You know, in spiritual community, which is what we're building here, we do sometimes point out areas for personal growth with one another. I can tell you, working closely with Rev Jane and being on our board of directors, I've had a lot of it pointed out to me. But we don't point it out to criticize. We don't point it out to compete. We point it out to hold one another accountable and to support one another in moving from that place of already being awesome to being awesomer. That's why we do it. That's how we do it here. That's the difference between spiritual striving and competition or comparison. And I also want to offer that striving doesn't have to mean hard work. A lot of that programming many of us got were that you got to work hard to be valuable. I am more and more, and this is again where agility is helping me. If I had to ask my little dog to work at it all the time, she's probably going to lose her enthusiasm. We don't go work on the agility course, we go play agility. And I'm learning to bring that more into my own work too, when I feel like I've got to work really hard. You don't. As powerful spiritual beings, you don't. If we can move more from the place of mind than grinding it out in the physical, it moves more fluidly. In a moment, Soulshine's going to come back up here and sing a song. Dave told me it was cheesy, but he did. But yes, you did. But he, but he didn't veto me on it, which I'm thrilled with. And I invite you, as you start to hear this song, play with it, sing with it. Lots of you are going to recognize it. Play with it, sing with it, and as you're doing so, kind of back to that meditation Jane led, just envision that you're singing this to any of those gatekeepers that you falsely empowered, that you are ready to fire. Sing this to them. Because you have the absolute power and the right to have no gatekeepers other than your own magnificent, highest self. Amen. Yeah. I'm going to stop. Amen. Right there. Don't diminish with competition. Know who you are, own it, and don't let anybody own you. You're up, Miss Benjamin.